Our reading this week is in Matthew 14, if you want to grab your Bible and be heading over to that place. Now, Matthew 14 is going to be familiar territory. Certainly,
More familiar miracles here.
yeah, certainly the last two stories I think are really, really familiar to us. Obviously, the feeding of the 5,000 is one of the most famous of Jesus' miracles, and then the walking on the water. I think people are familiar with that, and we know about the story of John the Baptist. I don't think his execution gets as much attention typically, but that's what you have. The start of the chapter is John the Baptist, then the feeding of the 5,000, then Jesus walking on the water, and the little miracle portion there at the end, getting that in for Jeff to make him happy today. So, but remember, great rule of Bible study is don't let yourself be fenced in by the chapter and verse divisions. And actually, I think really this little segment we're dealing with today slides in here perfectly with a bunch of other stuff that's been going on. So if you think back to 13, we had the parable of the sower, which was all about the heart and how the parables themselves were about the heart. For those with a heart to hear, the parable would be received even if it required more investigation. And I think we have kind of the same thing that's going on here that really connects interestingly with the end of 13, because in his hometown he's rejected. And we're told in verse 58, the very last verse, that he didn't do a lot of miracles there because of their unbelief. And so now we're getting into more examples of unbelief and more examples of miracles. And so as you read through this section, let yourself drift to the other sides. Don't be hemmed in by the chapter division. And really watch for this idea of signs, miracles, and hearts, the impact on the heart. Because I think that's a big thing of what's going on in all these stories.
Yeah.
If you kind of get the 10,000-foot picture of them, we're dealing with receptive hearts and hard hearts, even in the face of amazing signs.
Well, and these signs in particular that Jesus is working, for all their familiarity to many of us, they're particularly revelatory signs. They're revealing who he is for those with eyes to see, with a receptive heart. And so, you come out of this, we have parables of the kingdom, and Jesus, that's why you're talking in parables. Well, to test hearts, basically, he says, starting with the first and most famous of all the parables, the parable of the sower. And that's the whole point, is different heart. It's not the word, the seed is the same. The reception, whether it grows or not, depends on the heart, the soil. And so, hearts are being tested and revealed in all of this, both in the word and in the acts he's doing here.
As a quick aside to that, if I could interrupt.
Yeah.
We have to remember that in evangelism too.
Oh, sure.
Because no matter how effectively we present the gospel, there are some people who have hard hearts.
Yes.
And do not want to hear it. It's a shake the dust off your feet kind of moment where you just have to walk away. I think that's really, really critical, that lots and lots of people didn't even hear Jesus as he worked miracles in their very presence. And so we're naive to think that we're not going to encounter people whose hearts are just hard and don't want to hear it.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And that's why, again, it's not always I just need a better argument, I'm no good at this. Not that there are ratios in the Bible that we hold hard and fast, but the majority of the soils turned ultimately to be unfruitful soils. And at the end of the day, when Jesus ascends back from earth, he has fewer people than we have in the congregation here as followers on earth. I mean, that's and yet he's the greatest teacher who ever lived, and certainly the most truthful and the wisest. And yet, hearts were tested and hearts were revealed.
Right, exactly.
In his generation.
Exactly.
So that's the thing. But and then you've got the death of John the Baptist here is kind of foreshadowing, where Jesus at the end of chapter 13, as his teaching is being, they're challenged at the very end of chapter 13. People are taking offense at him, but Jesus says a prophet's not without honor except in his own household, his own home country, these kinds of ideas. And so, the very next story is the death of the prophet. And given that John was Jesus' forerunner, it's a bit of foreshadowing that, exactly what Jesus is talking about, this is what's coming for him as John is put to death. And so, again, in the rejection of John, you see a foreshadowing of the ultimate rejection of Jesus. Collectively, the hearts of that generation revealed in terms of the rejection of the message.
Yeah, and rejecting to such a level now that were killing people.
Yeah, violence and death.
Over all of this, just a dispute or an argument back and forth or anything like that. Now we have people dying.
Yeah.
And I think it connects back to the whole point about hearts, because it shows you the depth of their unbelief. When people can't win the argument, then they attack the arguer.
Right.
They attack the opponent. And that's what you see happening. When someone comes along and I can't deal with what they're saying anymore, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of this guy. I'm going to take him out.
No, that's exactly right.
And that's what they're doing to John the Baptist. And yes, foreshadowing what they're going to do to Jesus as well.
And then the two other, major stories that we have in this chapter, these are not just random miracles. These are, in particular, particularly revelatory miracles of who he is. For all the familiarity of the feeding of the 5,000, part of the point is that it's a creation. It's not literally something out of nothing. It's not full like Genesis 1 creation. But
it has a very Old Testament feel to it when you start thinking about it.
And other Gospels make more of this than Matthew's does in that regard, and give us more hints about Old Testament echoes and fulfillments.
Well, I mean, think about manna from heaven.
Well, that's exactly right.
The second Moses is feeding the people.
John's gospel emphasizes the wilderness feeding aspect of this, and in particular, John's gospel really, really wants us to see this is another Moses, another Exodus, another God creating a people out of a bunch of slaves. Now it's not slaves in Egypt; it's slaves to sin. Yeah. So yes, that's exactly right. But ultimately, the other aspect besides the echoes of manna from heaven is it is still a creation miracle, in that the only way you feed that many people out of that few, bits of food is to make more of it, to create something out of nothing, as it were. And so you have what's fundamentally, ultimately, a creation miracle. Who alone can do this but God?
Right.
And then, of course, the walking on the water, that's the whole thing, too, is, they think it's a ghost. But all after he reveals himself to him, it's I, and don't be afraid. And Peter, tries to walk and fail. His struggles to faith in this difficult moment, this revelatory moment. When he gets in the boat, when Jesus gets in the boat, they say, "Truly, you are the Son of God." They are accepting. They are coming to a deeper understanding of his identity. And one of the things that we miss, again, other Gospels bring this out a little bit more than what Matthew's doing here. But other Gospels give us a little more echo and direction. In that, this was something, walking on water was something Yahweh does in the Psalms in particular. Yahweh, the God, the Old Testament, revelation of God, walks on the water.
Yeah, I don't think we think about the Old Testament connection with this miracle.
No, and so this is Yahweh walking on water. This is not just a cool party trick. This is revelatory of who he is.
Jesus doing what God does in the Old Testament.
Correct. Jesus doing what God himself does in the Old Testament. And the other echo, and I think it's Mark's gospel that brings out a little bit more. There's a riff from the line of Job, similarly, where God walks on the water and he passes by and I perceive him not. In other words, that you also, the whole not fully getting, at least initially, who, that God is at work in this. And that's why they think it's a ghost, not Jesus originally. Right. They do not actually perceive Yahweh, God himself in flesh, is there walking on the water. And so, again, a particularly revelatory miracle wrapped in some Old Testament garb. And now you have their hearts revealed, weak as though, and of course we recognize that the faith is still very weak and very young and very immature given what's coming in the gospel story, but nonetheless, truly you are the Son of God. Their hearts are tested, and they are open to who this prophet, actually more than the prophet, might actually be.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, the Peter's part in that story sort of shows this wrestling with faith. He's kind of the poster child for the guy who's ready to jump out of the boat.
Yeah.
And then the guy that's sinking, right?
Yeah.
All at the same time. And
it's the same guy who says, "I won't deny you," and then denies. I mean, this is very on character for Peter.
Well, we're Matthew 16's coming up.
That's right.
And so we're going to have another Peter moment where literally in the moment he's kind of there and then he's not there.
Right.
And one of the things I love about that is it really is how faith is sometimes. Even with John the Baptist, we had the moment where he's like saying, "Are you sure you're the one?"
Well, and there's the intellectual side of faith where I know what I'm supposed to believe here, and then there's the emotional side in which, but it's hard when I'm the one in the middle of the storm walking on the water.
Yeah, you would think if Peter is seeing Jesus there coming on the water, that there would no need to be doubting anything ever again.
If he can do it, I can do it.
Which to me answers the objection that people often raise. They say things like, "Well, if Jesus would come back and work miracles today, then I would believe.
That would change everything.
If he would just appear right here and raise a dead person, I would believe in him. And I'm not so sure that's true.
Well,
I think people want to believe it's true.
Sure. And the whole idea that, it was different then because they were so much more primitive. Look, ancient people knew dead people don't come back to life.
That's exactly right.
And so when Jesus is raising their dead people, you have, this is human nature, and let's quit deluding ourselves that somehow we are different or special or the exception, and we just need a little bit more evidence.
Right.
No.
There's something else as we wrap this up I want to leave y'all with from the story, and it is in this section before he walks on the water. Pay attention to verses 22 and 23, because the Bible reading is all focused on getting us to read the book every single day. But the other half of that, the communication process, is praying to God. And we have this little snippet here of Jesus dealing with the crowds, dealing with the disciples, finding that quiet time where he can commune with God. And so there's just a great reminder there about the importance of prayer and literally the effort Jesus had to make so that would happen and be part of his life. And I think it's worth pausing over that and thinking about that. And as we spend this time reading, also thinking about how much time we really spend speaking with the Lord. I think there's an opportunity to think about that here. Hope you enjoy your reading and are blessed by it this week.